The morning sun had barely risen over the city skyline when Sarah Bennett left her modest suburban home. She wore a simple navy blue blazer and matching slacks, her natural hair neatly styled in a professional bun. At 42 years old, Sarah had mastered the art of blending in, despite being the owner of one of the city's largest real estate development companies. She chose to drive her 3-year-old Toyota Camry instead of her collection of luxury vehicles. Sarah had learned early in her career that success didn't mean she had to flash her wealth. The reliable sedan served her well for everyday business, especially when visiting potential investment sites in different neighborhoods. That morning, Sarah had scheduled an early meeting to inspect an abandoned warehouse on the east side of town. Her company, Bennett Urban Development, was considering transforming it into affordable housing units. It was the kind of project that made her heart sing, turning forgotten spaces into homes for families who needed them. As she drove through the quiet streets, Sarah mentally reviewed her packed schedule for the day. Board meetings, contractor discussions, and a presentation at the city council filled her calendar. The warehouse inspection needed to happen early before the day got away from her. The streets were nearly empty at 6:30 a.m., with only a few early morning commuters sharing the road. Sarah approached a four-way stop intersection, coming to a complete halt as she always did. She noticed a police cruiser parked on the corner but thought nothing of it. She had been driving for 25 years without a single ticket. Just as she turned onto Marshall Street, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she remained calm. She had done this before. The routine traffic stops that seemed to happen more frequently than they should. With practiced movements, she pulled over to the curb, turned off her engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Through her side mirror, Sarah watched the police officer approach. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with short blonde hair visible under his cap. His hand rested casually on his holster, a detail Sarah wished she didn't have to notice. "License and registration, please," the officer demanded, shining his flashlight into her car despite the morning daylight. "Good morning, officer," Sarah responded politely. "My documents are in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, if that's okay." The officer nodded, and Sarah slowly retrieved her paperwork. Everything was in perfect order, just as she always kept it. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, examining her license with a skeptical eye. "No, sir, I don't," Sarah replied truthfully. "You ran that stop sign back there," he stated firmly. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Officer, I'm certain I came to a complete stop. I always do, especially at that intersection." The officer's face hardened. "Ma'am, I was watching from my cruiser. You rolled right through it. I'm going to have to write you a ticket." Sarah knew better than to argue. Years of experience had taught her that challenging authority in these situations rarely ended well, regardless of how wrong they might be. She sat quietly as the officer wrote the ticket, her mind already planning how to handle this properly through the legal system. "Sign here," he said, handing her the citation. "Your court date is in 2 weeks. You can either pay the fine or appear before Judge Harrison to contest it." Sarah looked at the ticket amount, $2,500. Her throat tightened at the excessive fine, but her face remained neutral. "Thank you, officer. I'll see you in court." As she watched the police cruiser drive away, Sarah pulled out her phone and called her assistant. "Janet, I need you to clear my morning 2 weeks from today. And please contact the police department. I want the dashcam footage from this morning's stop at Marshall and 4th Street." She started her car, now running late for her warehouse inspection, but Sarah Bennett wasn't worried. In 2 weeks, she would have her day in court. What the officer didn't know, what most people didn't know, was that Sarah Bennett had built her success by standing up to injustice, one small battle at a time. She drove away, already planning her next moves. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful weapon against prejudice was simply showing up and proving people wrong. 2 weeks passed quickly, and Sarah Bennett prepared herself for her court appearance with the same attention to detail she gave her million-dollar business deals. She chose to wear a simple black pants suit with flat shoes. No jewelry except her mother's small gold cross necklace. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she carried a worn leather briefcase that had been with her since her early days as a real estate agent. The county courthouse was already busy when she arrived at 8:30 a.m. People lined the hallways, most of them people of color, waiting for their cases to be called. Sarah noticed how some of them looked worried about missing work, while others struggled to keep young children quiet in the stuffy corridor. Inside courtroom 3B, Sarah took a seat in the back row. She watched as Judge William Harrison handled case after case. He was a tall man in his 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that he frequently pushed up his nose. His black robe seemed to make him larger than life as he sat elevated above everyone else. Sarah observed his patterns. With white defendants, Judge Harrison was often lenient, accepting their explanations with understanding nods. But when people of color stood before him, his tone changed. He became stern, dismissive, and quick to impose maximum fines. Sarah took mental notes, her years of business experience helping her spot these subtle but important details. Case number 247, the court clerk called out, "Sarah Bennett, traffic violation." Sarah stood and walked confidently to the defendant's table. She placed her briefcase down quietly and stood straight, making eye contact with Judge Harrison. He barely glanced at her, busy shuffling through papers on his bench. "Miss Bennett," Judge Harrison said, still not looking up, "you're here for running a stop sign. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Sarah replied clearly, "and I have evidence to support my plea." Now Judge Harrison looked up, his expression showing mild annoyance. "Evidence? For a simple traffic violation?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've obtained the police dashcam footage from the morning in question. I'd like to present it to the court." The judge waved his hand dismissively. "That won't be necessary, Ms. Bennett. Officer Peterson is a trusted member of our police force. His word is sufficient." Sarah remained calm, though she could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I have the right to present evidence in my defense." "Miss Bennett," Judge Harrison's voice grew stern, "this court's time is valuable. The fine is $2,500. Do you need a payment plan?" Several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. They had watched similar scenes play out all morning, but something felt different this time. Sarah stood a little straighter. "No, Your Honor, I don't need a payment plan," she said clearly, "but I would like the record to show that you've denied my right to present evidence in my defense." Judge Harrison's face reddened slightly. "Are you trying to lecture me about the law, Ms. Bennett?" "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm simply ensuring that everything is properly documented for the Judicial Review Board." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Harrison's hand tightened on his gavel. The court clerk looked up from her computer, sensing the tension in the air. "The fine stands at $2,500, Judge Harrison declared firmly. "Pay it at the clerk's office on your way out." Sarah opened her briefcase slowly. The leather creaked in the now silent courtroom. Everyone watched as she removed her checkbook, not the kind you get free from a bank, but the kind bound in leather with gold-embossed initials. "Would you like to know something interesting about this courthouse, Your Honor?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying clearly through the room. She began writing the check with smooth, unhurried movements. Judge Harrison frowned. "Miss Bennett, this is not a conversation." "You see," Sarah continued calmly, "my company, Bennett Urban Development, recently won the contract to build the new courthouse annex across the street. It's a $50 million project." The pen in Judge Harrison's hand froze mid-signature on another document. He looked up slowly, really seeing Sarah for the first time that morning. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Judge Harrison's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, and finally, uncomfortable recognition. Sarah Bennett stood calmly at the defendant's table, her checkbook open before her. "Miss Bennett," Judge Harrison said, his voice notably softer now, "are you saying you're the CEO of Bennett Urban Development?" Sarah finished writing the check with careful strokes before looking up. "Yes, Your Honor. The same Bennett Urban Development that employs over 500 people in this city. The same company that has developed more than $500 million worth of properties in this county alone." People in the courtroom began whispering to each other. A young law clerk in the front row was frantically typing on his phone, probably looking up Sarah's company. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and cleaned them with his robe, a nervous habit he'd shown throughout the morning. "Well, Miss Bennett," he said, trying to regain his authoritative tone, "this is unexpected. Perhaps we should review that dashcam footage you mentioned. Sarah closed her checkbook with a soft snap. I don't think that will be necessary anymore, Your Honor. You've already made your ruling, and I respect the court's decision. She held up the check. Should I deliver this to the clerk's office, or would you prefer I hand it to you directly? Several people in the audience tried to hide their smiles. The court clerk looked down at her computer screen, fighting to keep a straight face. Officer Peterson, who had been standing near the bailiff, shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Bennett. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his voice almost friendly now. Let's not be hasty. As a prominent business leader in our community, you deserve a chance to present your case fully. Sarah picked up her briefcase and tucked the checkbook under her arm. With all due respect, Your Honor, I don't deserve any special treatment. I deserve the same fair hearing as every other person who has stood before you today. She gestured to the packed courtroom, like the young mother who couldn't afford her $500 fine for a broken taillight, or the elderly gentleman who got the maximum penalty for parking in the wrong spot while taking his wife to the doctor. Judge Harrison's face reddened again, but for a different reason now. Sarah continued, her voice clear and steady. You see, Your Honor, I could have come here in my Mercedes-Benz, wearing designer clothes and flashing my wealth. I could have brought my team of lawyers from Johnson, Smith, and Partners. They're on retainer, by the way. But I chose to come alone, dressed simply, driving my Toyota Camry. She paused, looking directly at the judge. Would you like to know why? The judge remained silent, but everyone in the courtroom leaned forward slightly, hanging on her words. Because I wanted to experience what ordinary citizens face in this courtroom. I wanted to see if justice truly is blind, or if it sees exactly what it wants to see, like the color of someone's skin or the apparent size of their bank account. Sarah walked toward the clerk's desk with her check. As she moved, people in the audience began to stand up. Not in protest or anger, but in quiet respect. The young mother Sarah had mentioned was wiping tears from her eyes. For the record, Sarah said, placing the check on the clerk's desk, I did stop at that sign. The dashcam footage proves it. But today wasn't about proving my innocence. It was about proving a point. She turned back to face Judge Harrison. The new courthouse annex will be completed in 18 months, Your Honor. It's designed to be a symbol of justice and equality. I hope that by then, the justice delivered inside it will match the ideals represented by its architecture. With that, Sarah Bennett walked toward the courtroom doors. As she passed, people nodded to her, some reaching out to touch her arm in silent support. Just before leaving, she turned one last time. Court is still in session, Your Honor, she said kindly. There are many people waiting for their chance at justice. I hope they receive it. The news spread through the city like wildfire. By the time Sarah Bennett reached her office that afternoon, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Local reporters gathered in the lobby of Bennett Tower, hoping to get a comment about what people were already calling the courtroom moment. Janet, Sarah's assistant of 8 years, met her at the private elevator with a worried look. Miss Bennett, every news station in the city is trying to reach you. The video is everywhere. Sarah paused. What video? Someone in the courtroom recorded everything on their phone, Janet explained, following Sarah into her office. It's all over social media, over 50,000 shares already. Sarah sat down at her desk, taking a moment to look at the city skyline through her floor-to-ceiling windows. Several of the buildings she could see had been developed by her company, including 3 affordable housing complexes she was most proud of. Show me, she said quietly. Janet pulled up the video on her tablet. The footage was a bit shaky but clear enough. It showed the entire exchange with Judge Harrison, captured from someone sitting in the middle of the courtroom. The moment when Sarah revealed her identity had been viewed, shared, and commented on by thousands. The mayor's office called, Janet continued. Twice, and the Bar Association wants to speak with you about joining their Judicial Review Committee. Sarah watched the video again, paying attention to the faces in the background. She saw the young mother who had been fined for the broken taillight, the elderly man who got the parking ticket. Their expressions showed something she hadn't noticed in the moment. Hope. Janet, Sarah said, making a decision. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. And get me everything you can find about Judge Harrison's ruling history for the past 5 years. Court records, appeals, complaints, everything. As Janet left to fulfill her request, Sarah's private line rang. She recognized the number. It was Marcus Johnson, her old law professor from 20 years ago. "I just watched a video of one of my favorite students teaching a lesson in justice," Marcus said when she answered. "Though I don't remember covering that particular topic in civil procedure." Sarah smiled. "Some lessons can't be taught in a classroom, Professor." "Indeed," he chuckled. "But they can certainly be taught in a courtroom. Sarah, what you did today, it's going to make waves." He was right. By late afternoon, Sarah's email was flooded with messages. Some were from other business leaders praising her courage. Many more were from ordinary citizens sharing their own stories of facing bias in the justice system. One email caught her attention. It was from a young law student who had been in the courtroom that morning, observing cases for a class assignment. "Dear Ms. Bennett," it read, "I watched you stand up to injustice today with such grace and dignity. As a black woman studying law, I'd often wonder if there's a place for me in this system. Today, you showed me that not only is there a place, but there's a responsibility to fill it. Thank you for showing me what real justice looks like." Sarah read the email twice, then pressed the intercom button. "Janet, contact the Bar Association. Tell them I'll join their committee on one condition. I want to propose a new oversight program for reviewing judicial conduct." She looked at the growing crowd of reporters still waiting in the lobby below. Soon, she would need to make a statement. But first, she had work to do. Opening her laptop, Sarah began drafting a proposal. She titled it, "Equal Justice Initiative, a Framework for Judicial Accountability." Years of building successful businesses had taught her that real change required more than just powerful moments. It needed concrete plans, dedicated resources, and unwavering commitment. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother. "Saw the video. Your father would be so proud. Remember what he always said." Sarah smiled, remembering her father's words. "Success isn't just about building wealth, baby girl. It's about building a better world." Today, in that courtroom, she had laid the foundation for something more important than any building her company had ever constructed. She had laid the foundation for change. 1 week after the courthouse incident, Sarah Bennett sat in a conference room surrounded by some of the city's most influential people. The mayor was there, along with 3 city council members, the president of the Bar Association, and several community leaders. The video of her courtroom encounter with Judge Harrison had now been viewed over 1 million times. "Ms. Bennett," the mayor said, leaning forward in his chair, "your proposal for judicial oversight is ambitious." Sarah nodded, looking around the table. "Change usually is, Mr. Mayor." She had spent the past week reviewing hundreds of cases from Judge Harrison's court. The pattern was clear. Defendants of color received harsher penalties and higher fines than white defendants for similar offenses. The data told a story that couldn't be ignored. The cost of implementing this program would be significant, one of the council members pointed out, flipping through the proposal. "My company will cover the initial costs," Sarah replied calmly. "Consider it an investment in justice." The room fell silent. Even the mayor looked surprised. Sarah continued, "But this isn't just about money. It's about changing a system that treats people differently based on how they look or how much they earn." She pulled out her tablet and showed them photographs. "This is Mrs. Rodriguez. Last month, Judge Harrison fined her $1,000 for a parking violation. She's a single mother working 2 jobs. She swiped to the next photo. This is Mr. Thompson, age 67. Maximum fine for jaywalking while taking his grandson to school." The Bar Association president, a woman named Linda Chen, spoke up. "We've received similar complaints before, but without someone of your influence bringing attention to it, they were easily dismissed." "That's exactly the problem," Sarah said. "Justice shouldn't depend on influence. It shouldn't matter if you're a CEO or a cashier. The law should treat everyone fairly." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from Janet. "Judge Harrison is here to see you." The timing couldn't have been better. Sarah looked at the mayor. "Would you like to see what real accountability looks like?" At her signal, Janet showed Judge Harrison into the conference room. He looked different without his black robe, smaller somehow and older. His face reddened when he saw the crowd of city officials. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice lacking its usual authority, "I've been doing some serious reflection this past week." Sarah gestured to an empty chair. Please, join us, Your Honor. We're actually discussing judicial reform. Judge Harrison sat down slowly, looking around the table. That's why I'm here, actually. I've reviewed my own case history for the past 5 years. The patterns are troubling. Sarah watched him carefully. This was the moment that would show if real change was possible. I've submitted my records to the Bar Association, Judge Harrison continued, and I'm requesting a full audit of my rulings. I've also asked to be included in any new oversight programs. He turned to Sarah. You showed me something in that courtroom last week, something I needed to see. The room was silent. Sarah thought about all the people who had emailed her their stories, who had faced bias but never had the power to fight back. This moment wasn't just about one judge or one courtroom. It was about changing the whole system. Thank you, Your Honor, Sarah said. That's a good first step, but it can't stop with just one judge or one courthouse. She stood up and walked to the window. From here, she could see the construction site of the new courthouse annex. Workers were laying the foundation, just as she was helping lay the foundation for a more just system. Ladies and gentlemen, she addressed the room, we have an opportunity here. We can show other cities that change is possible, that justice can be truly blind. The mayor nodded slowly. What do you need from us? Sarah smiled. Simple. I need you to do what's right, not what's easy. And I need you to understand that this isn't about shaming anyone. It's about fixing a broken system. As the meeting continued, Sarah noticed Judge Harrison taking notes. Real change, she knew, started with people willing to acknowledge their mistakes and work to correct them. It wasn't just about building new courthouses. It was about building a new way of thinking about justice. 2 months after the courtroom incident, Sarah Bennett stood at a podium in front of the old courthouse. A crowd of over 300 people gathered to hear her speak, many holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "Equal Treatment Under Law." Behind her sat Judge Harrison, along with 5 other judges from the county court system. They had all voluntarily joined the new judicial review program. Local news cameras rolled as Sarah adjusted the microphone. 3 months ago, I stood in this courthouse and experienced what thousands of others have faced, she began. But unlike many of them, I had the resources to fight back. Today, we're changing that. She gestured to a group of people seated in the front row, the same faces she had seen in court that day. The young mother with the broken taillight, the elderly man with the parking ticket. They were now part of the newly formed Citizens Justice Committee. Thanks to the support of our City Council and the Bar Association, we're launching the Equal Justice Initiative today, Sarah announced. This program will provide free legal support to those who can't afford it, and ensure that every case is reviewed for fairness. In the crowd, Janet stood with a tablet, monitoring social media. The hashtag Justice for All was trending nationally. Sarah's story had sparked similar movements in other cities, with business leaders and community activists joining forces to demand change. But this isn't just about legal support, Sarah continued. It's about changing the culture of our justice system. Every judge in our county will now undergo regular bias training. Every courtroom will be monitored for patterns of unfair treatment. And most importantly, every citizen will have a voice. She paused as applause broke out. From her podium, she could see the new courthouse annex taking shape across the street. The foundation was complete, and steel beams reached toward the sky. I'd like to introduce someone special, Sarah said, gesturing to a young woman approaching the podium. This is Maria Rodriguez, the new director of our Citizens Justice Committee. Maria, the same young mother who had been fined for a broken taillight, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice shook slightly as she began to speak. 2 months ago, I couldn't afford to fix my taillight or pay my fine, Maria said. Today, I'm leading a program that will help others like me. Miss Bennett didn't just pay my fine, she showed me how to fight for change. In the audience, several people wiped away tears. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, his face showing both regret and determination. Sarah returned to the microphone, but our work isn't done. Today, I'm announcing that Bennett Urban Development will create a $10 million fund for legal aid and community justice programs. This money will ensure that no one has to face the system alone. The crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters' hands shot up with questions, but Sarah wasn't finished. And to those watching in other cities, wondering if change is possible, it is. We've received calls from business leaders and community activists in 12 different states. They're ready to start similar programs. This isn't just a moment, it's a movement. After the speech, as the crowd began to disperse, a young black law student approached Sarah. She recognized her from the email she had received weeks ago. "Miss Bennett," the student said, "your story inspired me to switch my focus to civil rights law. But I have a question. Weren't you scared that day in court, standing up to a judge like that?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I wasn't scared because I knew I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing up for every person who couldn't afford to take that stand." She looked at the construction site across the street, where workers were installing the first windows in the new courthouse annex. "You see that building?" Sarah asked. "It's going to be beautiful when it's done. But what matters most isn't the building. It's what happens inside it. Justice isn't about fancy architecture or impressive robes. It's about treating every single person with dignity and respect." The student nodded, understanding lighting up her face. Above them, the afternoon sun reflected off the new courthouse windows, casting a bright light across the old courthouse steps. It seemed fitting, the light of change spreading across an old system, making way for something better. 6 months after the courthouse incident, Sarah Bennett sat in her office reviewing the latest reports from the Equal Justice Initiative. The numbers on her screen told a powerful story. Over 500 cases reviewed. 3 judges voluntarily stepped down after bias was found in their rulings, and more than 2,000 people received free legal assistance. But it wasn't all good news. Opposition had begun to emerge from those who preferred the old system. Some powerful people didn't like having their authority questioned. "Miss Bennett," Janet called through the intercom, "Judge Richardson from the state Supreme Court is here to see you." Sarah straightened in her chair. She hadn't expected this visit, though she'd heard rumors that the state's highest court was taking notice of her program. Judge Richardson entered the office, a tall woman in her 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent 30 years on the bench. "Miss Bennett," she said, declining the offered seat, "I'll get straight to the point. Your program is causing quite a stir in judicial circles." Sarah remained calm. "Change often does, Your Honor." "Some of my colleagues believe you're undermining the authority of the courts," Judge Richardson continued. "They're pushing for legislation to limit civilian oversight of judges." Sarah stood and walked to her window wall. The new courthouse annex was nearly complete now, its glass surface reflecting the morning sun. Would these be the same colleagues who've never had to worry about being treated unfairly in a courtroom? Judge Richardson's expression softened slightly. "I didn't say I agreed with them. In fact," she finally took the offered seat, "I'm here because I want to help expand your program statewide." Sarah turned, surprised. This was unexpected. "I've been watching what you've done here," Judge Richardson continued. "The data is impossible to ignore. Conviction rates, fine amounts, bail decisions, all showing clear patterns of bias. But more importantly, I've seen how your program is fixing these issues." She pulled out a folder. "I drafted a proposal for the State Judicial Council. We want to implement your oversight program in every courthouse in the state." Sarah sat down slowly, her mind racing with possibilities. "That would require significant resources." "Which is why I'm here." Judge Richardson smiled. "We need your expertise, your infrastructure, and yes, your influence. Will you help us?" Before Sarah could answer, Janet rushed in. "Miss Bennett, you need to see this." She turned on the office TV. The news showed protesters outside the old courthouse, but they weren't protesting against the justice system. They were supporting it. Hundreds of people had gathered, carrying signs that read "Keep Bennett Justice" and "No Return to Bias." The camera zoomed in on Maria Rodriguez, speaking to reporters. "When they tried to shut down the Citizens Justice Committee, we organized. When they threatened to cut our funding, we fundraised. This program saved my life, and we won't let anyone take it away." Judge Richardson watched the scene with interest. "You've done more than create a program, Miss Bennett. You've started a revolution in justice." Sarah thought about how far things had come from that morning in traffic court. She thought about the young law student who was now interning with the Citizens Justice Committee, about Judge Harrison teaching bias awareness to other judges, about Maria Rodriguez leading the community she once feared. Your Honor, Sarah said, turning to Judge Richardson, before we discuss statewide expansion, I'd like you to meet some people. She pressed her intercom. Janet, please call Maria and the committee members. Tell them we need them for an important meeting. As Janet made the calls, Sarah opened her laptop to show Judge Richardson the full data from their program. Real change happens when those at the top listen to those at the bottom. If we're going to expand this program, we need to do it right. Judge Richardson nodded approvingly. You know, when I first heard about a businesswoman taking on the justice system, I was skeptical. But you've shown that sometimes the best legal reforms come from outside the legal system. Sarah smiled, remembering her father's words about building a better world. The new courthouse annex would open next month, but the real construction of a fairer, more just system was already well underway. 1 year to the day after Sarah Bennett stood in traffic court, she walked through the gleaming doors of the new courthouse annex. The building was everything she had envisioned, open, welcoming, with natural light streaming through vast windows. But it wasn't the architecture that made her proud. Inside the main hall, a new sign hung prominently, Equal Justice Center, where fairness is foundation. Below it, dozens of people waited to meet with legal advisors from the Citizens Justice Committee. Maria Rodriguez, now a certified paralegal, moved efficiently between them, offering guidance in both English and Spanish. Ms. Bennett, a familiar voice called out. It was the young law student who had emailed her a year ago. Now she wore a badge identifying her as a program coordinator. We have something to show you. Sarah followed her to a wall covered with photographs and news clippings. At the center was the viral video screenshot from that day in court, but around it were hundreds of other images. People whose lives had been changed by the Equal Justice Initiative. Look at these numbers, the young coordinator said excitedly, pointing to a digital display. 5,000 cases reviewed. 300 successful appeals. 7 judges underwent voluntary retraining, and 20 other cities have started similar programs. Sarah noticed Judge Harrison talking with a group of new judges in a nearby conference room. Through the glass, she could see him pointing to data on a screen, teaching them about recognizing unconscious bias. He caught her eye and nodded respectfully. Ms. Bennett, Janet approached with her tablet. The governor's office just called. They've signed the Judicial Accountability Act. Your program is now state law. Sarah took a moment to let that sink in. What had started with a traffic stop had led to actual legislative change, but she knew the work wasn't finished. A commotion at the entrance drew her attention. A group of visitors from Chicago had arrived. Community leaders and business people wanting to learn how to implement the program in their city. Behind them, representatives from Atlanta, Detroit, and Los Angeles waited their turn. Tell them all to come to the main conference room, Sarah instructed Janet, and call Maria and the committee members. They should lead this presentation. As she watched the visitors file in, Sarah remembered something her father used to say, "Success leaves clues, baby girl. When you find something that works, share it with the world." Judge Richardson appeared at her side. Quite a difference from a year ago, she observed. You know, the National Judicial Conference is considering your model for federal courts now. Sarah smiled. It's not my model anymore. It belongs to everyone who's helped build it. Maria, the committee members, even Judge Harrison. They're the ones who made it work. Just then, a familiar face caught her attention. The young mother she'd seen in court a year ago, struggling to pay a traffic fine, was now helping another mother fill out appeal paperwork. The elderly gentleman who'd gotten the parking ticket was volunteering as a court companion for other seniors. Miss Bennett, Maria called out, would you like to tell the visitors your story? About how this all started? Sarah looked around the bright, busy hall. She saw people of all backgrounds being treated with equal respect. She saw judges learning from community members, and community members learning about their rights. She saw justice working the way it was supposed to. Actually, Sarah replied, I think we should let them tell their stories. Because this isn't about one person standing up to one judge anymore. It's about everyone standing up for justice, every single day. As she watched the visitors gather around Maria and the other committee members, Sarah thought about that morning in traffic court. She had walked in as a successful businesswoman trying to prove a point. She had walked out as someone with a new mission. The new courthouse annex stood as a symbol of that change, not just a building of glass and steel, but a place where true justice could flourish. And as Sarah Bennett looked at all the lives being changed within its walls, she knew that sometimes the greatest buildings weren't made of concrete and steel at all, but of courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right.